Please join me in the spoken meditation. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Epiphany is the season of light. The first disciples are much like the people that Isaiah spoke of, who walked in darkness, but now have seen a great light. The shining light seems to blind them to all they have known before, to their daily pursuits and their previous commitments. Many of us may think that these first disciples, these fishermen, as having a leisurely job. In our mind, we may associate fishing with a calm and laid-back scene. We imagine a little boat on a still lake, rocking back and forth gently. I can recall times like this with my family. We would each have a pole in the water with a hook on the end with bait on it. There was an excitement when the fish were biting, for sure, but most of the time was spent quietly waiting. I remember the sound of the water lapping up against the side of the boat and the smell of the fresh lake water, and I would watch the sky for the eagles and the osprey to fly overhead. I would smile as the loons would paddle by. Time spent fishing seemed to be like time without a care in the world. This view of fishing, though, is a far cry from how folks in Jesus' time experienced fishing. Reverend John Allen explains that fishing was exhausting work that presented almost no opportunity for economic success. Rome claimed full and exclusive rights to all the waters and any resources collected from them. This meant that the Galilean fishermen, like Jesus' first disciples, would have had to pay for the rights to fish. These taxes were often paid in kind as a portion of the day's catch, but would be collected whether they caught anything, whether the fishing was successful or not. This heavy taxation, along with the capital costs of a fishing boat and nets, rendered Galilean fishermen quite vulnerable and barely able to subsist. It was this sort of taxation that generated resentment toward empire in Galilee, throwing into sharp view the challenge of foreign rule. Often the best weapons that the peasantry had were to abandon their work in protest at taxation and imperial domination, so they wouldn't be making economic contributions to their own subjugation. An example of this happened in 37 CE, when the Emperor Gaius ordered his image to be placed in the temple. Knowing the turmoil such acts had caused in the past, he positioned a legion from Syria to be prepared to enact the offense by force. The rural population resisted. They walked off their fields. Understanding that their surplus fed the Roman legions, peasants organized a strike and refused to plant their crops. They didn't till their ground, even though they were required to sow it. They continued firm in their resolution and saw themselves willing to die rather than to see the dedication of the statue. In Josephus Flavius's reports on the Jewish revolt, he describes how local Roman authorities became worried that the fields were devoid of crops and that banditry would grow. The crop strike brought widespread attention to a greater theological concern about imperial domination, and the strike quickly spread. It grew to include mass mobilization of people in the streets of Jerusalem and in cities and towns around Galilee. This is the political context of Jesus' call to the first disciples to leave their nets behind. A context where walking away from labor that sustained empire was a familiar form of protest. I have to admit that reading this gave me a whole new way of interpreting the calling of the first disciples. Jesus invites Simon and Andrew to take a profound economic risk, and he is calling them away from the business of feeding empire and toward the work of healing, teaching, and loving marginalized people. Their eagerness to follow Jesus is striking. Our scripture reading says, immediately they left their nets and followed him. They quickly walked away from the life that they had known, even abandoning family. This may be a response to Jesus' charisma for sure, but it also bears witness to the smoldering sense of dissatisfaction in the brothers, a sense that they were ready to leave behind the tasks of a dominated people and seek new freedom with this leader. Reverend Allen says, Jesus' earliest followers were those who needed an alternative to Caesar's kingdom, and these first followers jump at the invitation to stop working for the empire. There are risks and costs associated with such a leap, and the text does not mask the cost of discipleship. The brothers leave behind their nets and their father. They leave behind their best chance at livelihood and the very communities that formed them for the sake of seeking after this new vision. When Jesus calls them to follow him, these disciples have the wisdom to leave their nets and pursue something extraordinary. They must have been hungry for much more than the food that they worked so hard for. And so I wonder, are we hungry enough to hear the call of Jesus? What would it cost us here in the privileged and affluent West to drop everything and follow Jesus? Are we ready to have our lives turned upside down to make room for the reign of God? After attending the Women's March yesterday, I have the feeling we are hungry enough and we are ready. I was planning on attending the march in Oakland until just a couple of weeks ago when a clergy friend of mine called me and asked if I would attend the Walnut Creek one instead. I knew the march in Oakland would draw a big crowd, so I agreed to go to the Walnut Creek March to help bolster numbers. It may or may not surprise you, but on this side of the hills, we're not known for our big rallies and protests. I was used to the big protests like the ones that I attended in Berkeley, so I was definitely surprised when I showed up to a crowd of 6,000 people at Civic Park. We are hungry, not for what the systems of this world have given us, but for peace, justice, and equality. We are hungry for a nation and a world where people are valued, all people. We are hungry for a way of life that leads to the healing of Mother Earth so that our grandchildren will have clean air and clean water. We are hungry for the reign of God. In a post I read from author and Franciscan priest Richard Rohr, he says, in the United States, we inaugurated a new president. While I pray President Trump leads with wisdom, compassion, and justice, we cannot simply sit back and watch whatever unfolds. We, the people, have a tremendous responsibility to work together, to speak truth to power, to peacefully advocate for the rights of all beings and the earth. This requires maturity and contemplative consciousness empathy for the other, and courage to stand with those who are suffering. It is not a popular or easy path, but as human beings, we are called to be active participants in our salvation and mutual survival. I hope that by rediscovering the great gifts of Christianity, we might live as our whole selves, becoming the united body of Christ. If following Jesus was easy, it would be like sitting in a boat on a calm lake on a summer day, but it's not. We are called to be actively working, actively doing our part to bring the reign of God to fullness for all of creation. The yoke of burden is much lighter when we do this work together. There is power in numbers, and the multitudes are gathering to speak truth to power, the truth that there is a way forward, and that way does not lie in turning back. So may the light of Christ blind us to all we have known before, so we can see clearly the way, which is the love of Christ Jesus. Amen.
Amen.